So we will talk portfolio management a little bit later, but I do just want to shift to Clover Health now and hear from Andrew and Vivek about what is insufficient and inadequate about the provision of healthcare for those over the age of 65 in the U.S.
Yeah. So great question. And when we think about our reason for being, so I started off my first three businesses I built in healthcare were all on the services side, starting about probably 16, 17 years ago. On the outpatient services side, a hospital business built a nationwide revenue cycle company, and I built a lot of business value doing that. But I would say what was very clear to me during all those experiences is that for most healthcare businesses, particularly on the services side, business value is not correlated with consumer value. And in many times it's at conflict with that. So we think about the many trillions of dollars of public market value and private market value that exists within healthcare companies today. You can't really correlate that business value with consumer value. Now, there's no doubt that those trillions of dollars of market value, private and public, has led to innovation in healthcare that has helped the whole world. Even you look at the vaccines announced, in the last couple of weeks. I mean, that was due to heavy R&D starting 10 to 15 years ago, and we're seeing the fruits of that. So, I would be the last one to say that the money sloshing around in healthcare hasn't led to very positive things. But when we think about where we're at, the sheer costs of which that it's taking to do that have gotten to astronomical. And part of this is a lot of it's driven by alignment of interests. And so, whether it's hospitals or skilled nursing facilities or EHR companies or PBMs, a lot of the ways they generate business value, whether it's keeping prices high, keeping patients longer, keeping drugs on brand, data blocking, those all lead to business value, but actually don't drive consumer value. Many times are at conflict with that. And my thinking started to shift just frankly as I started determining, what types of businesses that I want to build going forward. And for me, it was really around how can I get around a very hard problem that I think is important and solve it at scale. So my experience before Clover and after the services side was building a cancer data company called Flatiron Health that we ended up selling to Roche for about a couple $2 billion 2 years ago. And that was my first experience building anything on the technology side, whether in healthcare or out of healthcare. And frankly, for someone starting on the services side, when you build something where software and technology is at the core, your brain really gets rewired in how to think about solving problems. And your ambitions grow because you know what can be done at scale. What would normally have been thought of impossible is actually possible. And through that experience, as we thought through what was the next problem we wanted to tackle, we saw a huge opportunity in terms of reducing the variability of decision making by physicians. And when we think about where that has the largest negative impact, i.e. that the variability of decisions, and just to bring a kind of a clear lens to that, put really simply, if you take an elderly individual, let's say who's 80 years old, if he or she goes to see 10 different primary care physicians, each physician's going to come out with a different set of diagnoses, treatment plan, medication regimen, even different dosage levels. And it's not because they're bad physicians, they're not. They really lack access to accurate, prioritized, actionable data at the point of care. And when that happens is physicians then rely on, in that 10 to 15, 20 minutes, they rely on intuition, pattern recognition, rapid set of questions, and then you end up having a wide dispersion of decisions. And many times it's not tied to evidence-based protocols. And that wide dispersion of decisions leads to a wide dispersion of costs and poorer outcomes over the long term, short, medium, and long term. So then if we look at that population, so we take the 60 million individuals in Medicare, it's the highest per capita cost when we think about demographic, right? So the average cost for someone in that demographic to the United States government is over $10,000 a year. 80% of those individuals have at least one chronic condition. Almost 70% of those individuals have two or more chronic conditions. So when we think about what is a true consumer space, Medicare is very similar in terms of a consumer space as the way we may think about Amazon as a consumer product in e-commerce. Healthcare, when you're under 50, is not necessarily what we would call a daily use product. When you get of Medicare age, for 70% plus of the population, it is in terms of frequency of seeing a physician 5+ times a year, on average 3 medications. And so we didn't set out actually saying, let's build a better Medicare insurer. For us, it was really around what is the problem we want to solve. And for us, it was reducing that variability decision-making. And our determination was if we could bring great software to bear to physicians, we could reduce that variability gap. And we started this on a first principles basis, which was, could we build something that could service existing incumbents? Could we bring something and just be a vendor to participating players and work within the ecosystem? And having started within the ecosystem myself, I didn't have this fascination of disrupting a sector that I was already, part of in many ways. But it's really, really important if your goal is to really solve a problem, it really is not about what's the hardest path to execution, but what actually gives you the highest probability to solve that problem. And sometimes the path to drive the highest probability to solve that problem may be the hardest path to execute upon. And so the easiest path to execute upon would have been building something to service vendors, but it would have created the lowest probability of us actually being able to solve that problem. And there's a reason for that. And so when we thought about how do we build the best software, we needed to check a few boxes. One, we needed data access on our customers. Two, we needed to be able to deliver software to physicians and ensure that there was high engagement and ensure that we could drive really high utilization and customer experience in terms of physicians using it. And then three, if we were able to capitalize on that use, improve decisions, lower total costs, improve outcomes, drive down ER visits, drive down hospital admissions, extend mortality rate, or extend mortality, how do we benefit as a company, as an organization? And so for us, it was building best-in-class software. In our minds, it was only possible if we built it in our own verticalized insurance company. And that's really where the thesis started and why we started our own insurer and why I had to put my own capital into start it over the first many years, because everyone we went to initially on the venture side wanted us to take the lowest risk execution path. And as an entrepreneur, you're sometimes very optimistic and delusional, and you take the approach of, well, I want to solve the problem, and this is the path that I need to do. And no one's going to remember if I lost that money, because it's just going to be what I have to live with myself with. But when you can get through those early parts, then it becomes more clear to investors that maybe that is the right path. You've gotten through the harder part on the execution side. And so here we are at a point now, many years later, where we've scaled software to physicians, turned this into or productized it to where it emanates itself to consumers in the lowest cost product in terms of insurance plans or consumers. But from a physician perspective, they get great access to information at the point of care around accurate diagnoses, proper treatment planning, evidence-based protocols, care coordination. And now we're extending that software beyond traditional Medicare Advantage or private Medicare, which is a little over 20 million of the 60 million, but now into the additional 40 million of individuals in traditional fee-for-service Medicare, where the government is rolling out a program called direct contracting next year, where Clover is going to be taking, we feel, a large or leading position in, where we can extend our software into the population of Medicare patients that don't actually have private Medicare insurance, but are directly paid for by the government, and where physicians actually can take full financial risk, offload it onto Clover, and then Clover monetizes that by giving our software away for free and keep the savings that we generate for the government and for consumers. And so, a lot of this wasn't possible until about 3 years ago when Andrew and I met. So at that point, we were just at the point of making the turn to completing the build of our data platform, and then having to turn that or take that now to physicians, where we're literally bringing that pane of glass to physicians to productize it essentially. And Andrew and I got to know each other over quite a while. And there's very few individuals who've been able to pick up healthcare as quickly as he has that I've ever met. And his background, as he'll go through, is really uniquely positioned, set up to not just understand the technology side really well, but to actually bring that to bear in healthcare and what we've done over the last few years or so.